Thanks so much, Shannon. Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to our 2024 NOAA Fisheries EBM/EBFM seminar series. And we're happy today to kick it off with Dr. Howard Townsend from the Office of Science and Technology, who'll be our speaker today. We've been having this series to really increase awareness about ecosystem-based management, particularly with respect to fisheries management, and highlight the progress that many of our colleagues in NOAA and also our partners are making to implement EBM strategies. The library, as you can see, continues to be our valuable co-host for this series, and these seminars are often offered on the second Wednesday of each month at 3 in the afternoon Eastern Time. They are publicly accessible, as Shannon pointed out, and recorded and archived, so you can go back and look at some of the series from the past couple of years. And also, please feel free to share them with your colleagues if they could not make today's presentation. And I want to thank a lot of our speakers who have been with us since the beginning, and colleagues and attendees who continue to provide great recommendations for future presentations. So before we turn it over to Howard, I just want to mention that our next one will be on February 14th, Valentine's Day. And it'll be Chris Harvey from our Northwest Fisheries Science Center, and he's going to be speaking about a retrospective of EBFM with respect to NOAA Fisheries. So stay tuned and join us on the 14th of February. So again, thanks, Howard, for joining us, and you're going to give us an update on the Ecosystem Modeling Workshop, NEMoW, and our efforts to develop models that'll help us with our climate-ready fisheries management. So I'll just turn it over to Howard now, and thank you very much.
All right, thanks very much, Peg, and thank you to Shannon for supporting this and getting this all set up. And also congratulations. I saw last month that this was the best attended seminar series that the library hosts. So congratulations on that. That's a real testament to your efforts, Peg. To everybody else, thank you for this opportunity to talk with you today about our recent National Ecosystem Modeling Workshop, NEMoW. The most recent one, we had ecosystem modelers and climate ocean modelers get together to really get in the weeds and discuss how to use climate model products in ecosystem models, in support of climate-ready fisheries management and ecosystem-based fisheries management. Before I get into the details of that particular workshop, I did want to give a little background on the NEMoW workshops in general, or NEMoWs in general. And probably before I even get into the details about NEMoWs, I should clarify what kind of the ecosystem modelers in NOAA Fisheries kind of think of as ecosystem models, because I realize folks in different disciplines, when you say ecosystem model, a different sort of idea might pop into your head. So, an oceanographer might think of an NPZ, nitrogen, phytoplankton, zooplankton model as an ecosystem model. Other folks might think, oh, ecosystem model, you mean like Atlantis or Ecopath with Ecosystem and Ecosystem. Ecosystem and ecospace, I'm sorry, one of a food web model or a larger, more sort of holistic model. In NEMoWs, we sort of take this broad view of sort of, there's a spectrum of tools for ecosystem modeling for living marine resources, and sort of, just a good bit of overlap with stock assessment and protected resources type modeling, certainly. But we take the view sort of, maybe instead of going through all these different types of models, kind of in the spectrum, and thanks to the Northeast Center for this this slide. This slide has been evolving over the years of how we think about the system model. But for simplicity's sake, we might just think of ecosystem models as any type of ecological ecosystem model that's used to inform ecosystem-based fisheries management, ecosystem-based management, or just ecosystem-oriented management broadly. Just a little background now on NEMoW. So the first NEMoW was conceived of when several different NOAA fisheries models were talking together. Either there was an ICES conference in Berlin where we talked, a few of us got together and talked, and then another AFS meeting in Alaska, or maybe it was Scotland, Aberdeen, not Berlin. I think I've got that mixed up. Yeah, and the AFS meeting in Alaska, folks like Jason Link, Karen Iden, Sarah Gates, John Field, Frank Parrish, and lots of other folks who kind of got in these initial discussions, folks who at their science centers around the different regions, of NOAA Fisheries, saying it would be good for us to have some time to get together. We're kind of working on our models, in particular regional ecosystems. But it would be good just to get together and sort of share tips and best practices and sort of help advance the ecosystem modeling enterprise in NOAA Fisheries as a whole, across all the science centers. And so with the support of the Science Board and the Office of Science and Technology, and especially the Marine Ecosystems Division, we convened the first NEMoW workshop at the Santa Cruz Lab back in 2007. And some of the major outcomes, so going to bring you up to the date to the meeting we had just last August, September in 2023. But we've made a lot of big improvements in our ecosystem modeling enterprise, and some of the major outcomes from NEMoW have just been this networking and swapping, and meeting the new postdoc who's doing the new cool thing, and figuring out how to help other folks get started with that new approach. Also helping to develop some best practices and other tools to help support or grab data or that sort of thing that you need for ecosystem models. The workshops also were a great way to sort of advance our ecosystem modeling and ecosystem-oriented science to make sure we're really supporting ecosystem-based management, ecosystem-based fisheries management. And since that first NEMoW, we had maybe one or two of the centers and the Habitat Conservation Office that I was in had some dedicated ecosystem modeling efforts and groups. And now all the centers have, not programs, teams that are doing some ecosystem modeling. And at least 4 of our centers now, maybe I've lost track of count here, but I know of at least 4 I can name off the top of my head, have had some of their ecosystem models undergo the thorough sort of CIE type of review, so that the model outputs would be considered useful for actually doing decision making, supporting decision making, and that sort of thing. So really, I think it's been very effective to have these workshops to help the enterprise across our NOAA Fisheries folks. Just kind of a high level, what we've talked about over the past 5 or 6 NEMoWs here. The first one was just, hey, let's kind of make sure we understand all the different model types, how they use the data needs, and how which ones we might need for a particular region or for a particular question. Later, we had a NEMoW in Annapolis, Maryland, that was focused on dealing with the credibility gap, dealing with the uncertainty. That's where they see sort of a credibility gap, that people weren't sure about how we were dealing with the uncertainty. And so, had a good paper come out of that. We had one, I think it was 2010 or maybe 11, mingling models for marine resource management. So thinking about model ensembles and using multiple models to deal with some of the uncertainty. Sort of one of the big topics that came out of the second NEMoW was using multiple models is a good way to deal with structural uncertainty and parameter uncertainty and that sort of thing. So we pursued that idea a little further. Fourth NEMoW was in St. Petersburg, Florida, at the CIRO, at the Southeast Regional Office, and we took a look at how we're using models to evaluate trade-offs. We also had a great opportunity to bring in some of the regional office folks there to talk about some of the issues they deal with in habitat and protected source resources and fisheries management, where there's trade-offs were arising, and kind of understand what types of tools that would they need to help them address some of those trade-offs. Then we had a NEMoW back in 2019, just a few months before all travel ceased for a while. We just So let's kind of keep track of the progress that we've made here. We've really advanced things, and one of the big things that came out of that fifth NEMoW was a special topic journal issue on frontiers of marine science. Actually, a research topic is the term of art they use instead of special issue, but it's using ecological models to support and shape environmental policy decisions. So we had lots of 5 or 6 papers from NEMoW specifically, and then also lots of other papers from around the world to show how much we've kind of advanced with this sort of modeling. And of course, all of then what I'll be talking about today is our ecosystem models for climate-ready fisheries management sort of thoughts we were covering at this last NEMoW. All of these have a tech memo. Well, the 6th one is in progress, but the other 5, and so if you're interested in any of those, you can certainly see what we had to say before, and I'll be glad to get you a copy of any of these if you're interested. So for the 6th NEMoW, just general information, we had around 60 participants in person. I say around 60 because we were located in, we had the meeting at this East-West Center in Hawaii on the University of Hawaii campus. We were fortunate that we had, lots of students could come by, grad students and other folks who were postdocs who were involved in ecosystem modeling could come by as time allowed, and then some of the other science folks, the climate and ocean modelers and ecosystem modelers at the University of Hawaii could drop by, and folks from the Pacific Islands Science Center and regional office also could kind of drop in. So that's why I say around 60. We had, at any given moment, we had 50 or so, but some days even more. And then a lot of folks online. This was our first experience doing a hybrid, and that sort of worked out pretty well. We also had lots of folks from around the world, because this was a joint meeting with the Fisheries Modeling Intercomparison Project, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So we had folks from Australia, Canada, Spain, South Africa, all over the world. And just as a side note, I have a picture of the East-West Center where we met here, and a little side note there is just that EcoPath with EcoSim is one of the foundational software packages that we use in ecosystem modeling. Anybody who's done ecosystem modeling has at least played with an EWE model, as we call it for short. And EcoPath, the first part of EcoPath with EcoSim, that EcoPath module was initially developed by Jeff Polavina at the Pacific Island Fisheries Science Center in the early 80s. The paper came out in 1984. He and others were at the center were working to describe the energy flows between fish and other marine organisms, associated with Hawaiian reef ecosystems, and they kind of came upon this sort of trophic flow approach and developed the first the initial software there. And the point here is that we were having this big NEMoW meeting in the same place where Jeff and several others from the Pacific Island Center had meetings at that East-West Center as they were developing EcoPath, 40 some years later. That was kind of a neat aspect to it. Just a real quick bit about the Fisheries Model Intercomparison Project. Like I said before, this was a joint meeting with the folks from FishMIP, as they call it for short, where they have done a lot of work with connecting up Earth system models, mostly coupled climate ocean models, to provide inputs and drivers in a standardized approach to pull those into ecosystem models. And also, like us, they have an orientation towards it's a good idea to build multiple models to do some ensembles of models. So fortunately, we had John Ream from the Alaska Science Center and Phoebe Woodworth Jeffcoats from the Pacific Island Science Center, who had some connections with FishMIP and helped to arrange sort of this joint meeting approach, and that was really helpful. And FishMIP has done a lot. They've got lots of global and regional ecosystem models. They've done a lot to sort of develop ways of grabbing the outputs from those, and kind of worked out a lot of the technical details is maybe a good way to say it. And they're moving towards doing more regional models and applications, and doing more management applications with their models. So they were also interested in us because that's kind of where NOAA Fisheries' interest lies. Is we tend to focus on regional models for fisheries management applications. So that just made all things kind of fit very well. And I should mention that their FishMIP is plugged into the IPCC and the sort of intersectoral impact model intercomparison project, where they're doing this sort of approach not just with fisheries ecosystem models, but with lots of other models being linked to sort of climate models and their drivers. So been really good to kind of get that connection, more connections between us at NOAA and the FishMIP folks. Now, specifically, sort of our ecosystem modeling workshop objectives here, and was really, we wanted to, we're all cognizant of the Climate Ecosystem and Fisheries Initiative and some potential funding coming forward, and at the time when we're planning, and just the issue of how climate will affect fisheries and other living marine resources and productivity of ecosystems. And we thought it would be a good idea. Let's start getting our ducks in a row, talk with each other about what we've been doing at our different science centers and labs around the regions to build these sort of ecosystem models that have climate drivers and linkages, and how they're being used to inform management. And sort of the big things we always tend to do at these NEMoWs is sort of, whatever the topic area is, kind of review the efforts that are going on in each fisheries science center, and make sure we have a large group of people hearing what everybody else is up to and can learn from each other that way. We also wanted to review some of the available climate modeling and ocean modeling, just sort of climate products generally available for incorporation into ecosystem models. Kind of understand the best way of taking some of those outputs and using them in our ecosystem models and in different structures of our ecosystem models. As I sort of alluded to before at that first slide with the spectrum of different types of models, you have models of different complexity. You might need different levels of complexity of outputs from these climate ocean models. The other thing we started to see as a need to get started sorting out and thinking about is just sort of the computing infrastructure needed to support these climate and ecosystem model linkages. You have these large ocean and climate models, running on high performance and supercomputer systems, and most of us with our ecosystem models are running them on our desktop machines. Some efforts, running things in the cloud or on high performance computing, but realizing that we might need to start getting a little more up to speed with that sort of stuff. We also wanted to, another thing we often do, and whatever the topic of our NEMoW is let's think about the policy and management uptake, applications, implications of what we're doing, and how we can make sure that we are really crafting things where they're well suited for decision making. And again, because we're there with our FishMIP colleagues, have an opportunity to see what they're up to and see if there's opportunities for increased collaboration. And finally, we like to develop sort of best practices or good practices and recommendations. Sometimes we haven't practiced things a lot, so whatever practice you have is maybe the best practice, or at least maybe sometimes we're learning what not to do also. So that's also can be a useful outcome of some of these meetings. And one of the big things we had to kick us off was we had Roger Griffiths from the Office of Science and Technology kind of give us a good overview of the Climate Ecosystems and Fisheries Initiative, so that we really understand what's going on there and how we can help plug into that, and we as the ecosystem modelers at the workshop plug into that and help to move forward and help make sure we're laying the groundwork for a future where NOAA Fisheries can do a good job of incorporating climate into ecosystem and other fisheries models and living marine resource models, I should say, generally. And so, it was really good to hear from Roger on that and to have him around to discuss, talk with the ecosystem modelers from the different centers and also the climate and ocean modelers that were there with us, and make sure we can kind of support this effort in the long run. And I won't read through all these slides, but you can take a look at them later, or feel free to ask questions. Now, I don't want to hit on every one of our terms of reference, but sort of some of the high points, highlights from some of the efforts, because I really would like to kind of let you know broadly what we did here. If we go into the weeds on everything, it would take a day to do this talk. So I want to hit broadly on things, and at the end of this, we can ask questions and go into a little more detail as needed. So one of the things that kind of came out to us is that many participants noted that they were unaware of sort of the wide range of climate products available. So this figure sort of shows you have different model types, and then different, so those model types have different acronyms here, and then different scenarios denoted by the numbers and series, and realizing, well, we don't always know what the best range of these scenarios and models to even use output from. So to hear from folks about that, and we had a really great sort of overview talk from Cheryl Harrison from Louisiana State University, who's worked a lot with fish MIPS and with this sort of ocean modeling, kind of outlined it well, and lots of other talks from other climate and ocean modelers, I should say, as well. Really help the ecosystem modelers in the crowd know what's going on, and start getting down a path of knowing what's going to work best for their model type, the region they're in, what models, what scenarios in the climate realm are there out there for us. The other big thing was, we have a lot of different types of models that we use in our ecosystem modeling approach. So we have sort of these ecospace type models, species distribution models, just quite the range. Sort of and multi-species and whole system, other models like that. So we kind of reviewed those different model types and how people in the past have used different ecosystem model, or I'm sorry, climate and ocean model outputs to sort of drive some behaviors in fish and other living marine resource interactions in those models. And so we spent a good bit of time reviewing that. The other thing that really kind of jumped out to a lot of us is that as we move forward, there's going to be a pretty need for some robust computing infrastructure and sort of training or folks to help facilitate using this. Most ecosystem modelers, unlike our friends in the Weather Service or OAR, we don't have a lot of experience, using high performance computing and cloud and that sort of thing. That's certainly changing and evolving, but we did note that there's going to be some time where we need to help thinking about how do we get the data off of the supercomputers or cloud into our models. What are the best ways to do that? And so one of the things we have done as a spinoff of this NEMoW is begin talking with some of the folks from the CEFI and other IRA data modernization groups to start thinking through how do we make this happen. And we will continue that conversation, certainly. And again, always a big topic or big general area we cover in our NEMoWs is sort of the so what. How do we make this meaningful and useful to the folks who are doing living marine resource management, be it fisheries or protected resources or making habitat decisions, and they need some reproducible, quantitative, dynamic information from a model. And we certainly noted existing things, existing ways to communicate and bring this in, sort of on ramps, I should say, to management. Things like ecosystem status reports and the ecosystem and socioeconomic profiles, different ecosystem indicators, but also started to think about, well, we should maybe start moving towards developing climate ecosystem-based reference points and developing sort of climate ecosystem MSEs, management strategy evaluations. In other words, maybe have an ecosystem model with climate drivers, influencing it as sort of an operating model that then another model would use output from that to do an assessment and then evaluate how different climate conditions might affect your assessment based on that operating model. And certainly open to ideas for new products. And I'm sure as we move forward with our climate and ecosystem and fisheries initiative, we will develop all kinds of new visualizations and approaches for dealing with this. And then the other sort of new idea that we really started thinking about is, we're going to really have some opportunities in this sort of more climate-informed world. We're going to have opportunities to think about how we give advice to fisheries managers and other living resource managers. Sort of the kind of conventional way is you do stock assessments and other things on an annual or every few years sort of time step, and provide information about the status of stock and how to prevent overfishing. But with these climate models, that we could have really finer time scales and hindcast and forecast and the longer term forecast, that there might be time where we can start to do sort of more ecosystem modeling approaches and provide sort of more real time or short-term forecast based on a climatic condition that could inform decisions on a shorter, like weekly to monthly time scale. And certainly a lot of ecosystem modeling and climate information is geared towards, let's think longer term, strategic, broader, broader, what's the productivity of the ecosystem going to look like under a different climate regime, under higher temperatures, under a variety of ocean acidification, other things that might be happening. And so thinking about the tools that would be helpful for and management approaches for kind of moving in these other time scales. So that's sort of the highlights of this NEMoW. Again, I wanted to kind of keep this relatively short so that we'd have some time to discuss, because this is sort of an area of active movement and work with the CFI and IRA activity that's going on. And so I want to kind of keep this to a shorter talk and have a little more time for questions and discussion and that sort of thing. So I'll stop now. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, want some more information, feel free to email me, call me, leave a note in the survey form at the end of the presentation here today when the library sends that survey form out. In lots of ways, because this is definitely a conversation we need to keep open. So again, thank you for your attention, and I'll stop now and we'll take questions.
Howard, thank you so much. This was a fantastic presentation. I'm just going to give everyone a couple of minutes to put their thoughts into the questions box. And as a reminder, if you can't find that, look for the little orange arrow on the right side of your screen. So I'm not seeing any questions come in right now. Peg, I'm just going to pass it off to you if you have anything that you would like to say.
I don't have any questions, but I do want to thank Howard. That was an excellent overview of the work that's being undertaken, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share that. Perhaps we'll get you back here too and tell us a little bit more about the progress that's being made in each of these areas in another couple months to a year, hopefully.
Yeah, certainly be glad to do that. And again, if people have questions and it's harder to kind of type them out and they want to just ask me stuff, again, I'm available email or as you work on that survey, if you have questions in there, I'll respond to those.
I think you have a question in there, Shannon.
Okay.
Yeah, we just got one question in. And I will also say if anyone has more technical questions, as Howard said, you're welcome to put those in the chat and we can have Howard follow up with you afterwards if they are, require a bit of a longer conversation. But the first question we have here says, is there a geographic domain already set? And second question there, is NOAA also planning in the future to make the ecosystem models available to the public?
So is there a geographic domain already set? I need a little more detail on that. I'll answer as best I can with what I'm thinking in my head, and we can follow up later. But for the ocean, climate ocean models within the Climate Ecosystem and Fisheries Initiative, they certainly have regional models and sort of some pilot, I shouldn't even say pilot, they've been going on for a bit now, where they have done, for example, the Alaska Bering Sea, Northeast, I can't name them all off the top of my head, where there are some domains set where they're using, climate ocean models and geographic, ecosystem models of that geography, of that region. But my understanding is, with sort of the climate ocean modeling used in CEFI, there's some flexibility in selecting your geography, and certainly you can build an ecosystem model of any sort of region, geographic region. Our tendency in NOAA Fisheries has been, if we work for, say, the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, then you've got sort of, the Northwest Atlantic coast, the Northeast, off the Northeast, models there, whether it be subcomponents, different regions, say Georges Bank or the Mid-Atlantic or whatever, or just a whole system model. There's a certainly kind of the approach we've used as far as regions and geographies, just because it's a region and geography where the fisheries management and other resource management, it's kind of where NOAA has purview. And so, but certainly there's flexibility and potential to, hey, let's look at across multiple regions to see species shifts and distribution. So I hope I've answered that question well enough. If not, feel free to shoot me an email or we can set up a call or whatever and clarify that.
Thanks so much. We have a few questions that came in while you were talking, Howard. The next one says, can you speak about VAST models in the ecosystem modeling complexity spectrum?
Yeah. VAST models, I think we had some discussion about that because there's certainly the option with VAST, as to say that's vector autoaggressive spatial temporal models that Jim Thorson in our Alaska Science Center has kind of been heading that up for some time now, and certainly those are useful. They are much more of a statistical model, and that's one dimension I didn't kind of go over in that spectrum. There's sort of some models that are more simulation, kind of like the climate models are. Here's the basic parameters. Let's run that model and see what will happen in the future. And then there's some that are more statistical, like a stock assessment model, or some of our like the Alaska Seattle model, a multi-species statistical catch at age model, where you're fitting models to data and estimating parameters. And so VAST is certainly in that statistical modeling sort of purview. And as far as complexity, I think there's a range of complexities you can make a VAST model. You can look at a single species. You can look at, in your survey data, you can look at species assemblages. You can bring in some environmental and potentially climate data, spatial data, but yeah, that's maybe the key component is they're very spatial, and you know, that's certainly a tool that a lot of ecosystem modelers use and stock assessment modelers use. So I think it's right in that spectrum and sort of variability and complexity depending on what you're trying to do with it.
All right, thanks so much.
Yeah, and if Jim Thorson is on, he can send in a comment if I said something wrong. So sorry. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Howard. The next question we have says, in the NEMoW meetings, were there any gaps identified in Earth observations, such as satellite data, that would help enhance modeling efforts?
That's a very good question. And we kind of didn't really go down that path very much. We sort of, as ecosystem modelers, we look to our climate and ocean modelers as the experts on those satellite data. So we didn't talk about that a lot, except for a bit with sort of ocean productivity and plankton and that sort of thing. That might be a place where, you know, some satellite data and that sort of thing could be helpful in trying to think of the term of art here, but sort of making sure that the climate ocean model matches up well with the real world conditions, and that then could be used to drive our ecosystem model. So I say productivity, but probably similarly for sea surface temperature or other things you get from satellite. Certainly would be important at minimum for, you know, informing and sort of skill testing and tuning the climate and ocean models, and also potentially important as sort of initial inputs in the ecosystem models. And so it's a good question. I think it's a useful source of data, definitely.
Great, thank you. We have one question left. So if anyone has any lingering thoughts, make sure to pop those into the questions box. And now, the last question that we have says, how many years out do you think we are in linking ecosystem models between different EPUs and LMEs?
Okay. How far out are we from making EPUs, ecological productivity units, and LMEs, large marine ecosystems? I think is what I heard. And how making models linked between those systems? I wasn't quite sure of the question there.
I'll repeat it. It says, how many years out do you think we are in linking models between different EPUs and LMEs?
Yeah, and I think that's something we could, anytime somebody decides to do that, we could do that, right? I think certainly we have models of different large marine ecosystems, and it's one step, be a step just to identify species that are common to both, or could potentially move from one LME or EPU to another, and sort of kind of rework those existing models, or something that you could do from scratch, right? You could say, instead of just doing a model of the North Atlantic and the South Atlantic, and I mean that from the sort of a U.S. perspective, so the in our council sort of perspective, that region, not necessarily North Atlantic, the North American, South Atlantic, and South America, but keeping it down to a smaller region. I think that could be a project, right? You could just have someone who maybe draws heavily from existing models in those regions to build one big sort of U.S. Atlantic coast regional model. And I think that would be fairly straightforward. I mean, any of these ecosystem models, there's a lot of decisions that go into what species should I include, what's the purpose for the model. But if somebody were to get a project like that started, I would say it'd take you a few years to get it up and running, and then maybe another few years to validate and test and have it ready to start addressing some questions. So I think it's well with our reach. It's just not been something that's been a major focus, as we have tended to focus on what's the questions in this region for this council or for this, management body. I hope that answered the question well. And if not, you can follow up with me via email.
Howard, thank you so much. I'm not seeing any more questions come in through the chat. So I will just say again, thank you so much to everyone attending, and Howard, thank you for this fantastic presentation. And I saw one question that just came in. You caught me just in time. All right, this last question says, let me get it pulled up here. What geographic areas do you think more modeling needs to be done for an effective ensemble modeling approach that can provide refinements in ecosystem modeling approaches?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And certainly just by nature of the history of our efforts in that we've kind of kept track of over NEMoWs and what's going on in the centers, we certainly see that that the northern regions like Alaska and Northeast U.S. have had a longer history of doing this sort of thing. Hawaii, had some long history with one model for a while, but certainly some of our more southern latitudes, like the Pacific Islands and Gulf of Mexico, South Atlantic, and sort of our Caribbean partners, have not been doing as much as long as some of the northern efforts, and so there's certainly some additional work to help build those ensembles, and support that would be good. Not to say that they haven't been doing anything. There's quite a lot of good effort at all those regions. Just to say that they haven't had as long and as intense a history as some of the other regions. So but we're rapidly moving towards where most of our centers, at least for some of their regions, that's the other thing to keep in mind, is that multiple centers have multiple regions that they have to do models for, and they might have a lot of models for one region and maybe not as much for another region. And so that's certainly a thing to keep an eye towards. In my perfect world, we'd have all our centers with ensembles for all their regions and be ready to rapidly respond to ecosystem-based questions, at least with a quick and pretty good answer. And then if you needed to revise a model and make it a little more detailed to get into the weeds a bit more with a specific question, they have a backbone of information and experience about the ecosystem and ecosystem modeling where they could develop other models as needed for more specific questions. So hope I answered your question. I'll be glad to follow up with you on that.
All right, thanks so much. I'm not seeing any more questions come in now. So I will pass this off to Peg to close us out today.
Well, thank you, Shannon, and special thanks to Howard for joining us today, and look forward to having him come back. Please join us on February 14th for Chris Harvey's presentation, EBFM Retrospective. So stay tuned for that. And again, Happy New Year to everyone, and thank you for joining us.